There's a scene in Shakespeare in Love when Simon Callow, portraying Sir Edmund Tilney, the master of the revels, who was responsible for the censorship of drama in England, arrives at the Rose Theatre and shortly afterwards cries, "So, a woman on the stage?" Because he had heard there was a woman performing on the stage at the Rose. The woman was Gwyneth Paltrow's character, Viola de Lesseps, who had disguised herself as a man, Thomas Kent, because she wanted to act on the stage. And later in the scene, a young member of the company played a cruel trick by dropping a mouse down the back of her costume, and in trying to remove the mouse, dislodges her short-haired wig to reveal her long blonde hair. And shortly before leaving, Tilney proclaims, "This theatre is closed. Welcome to Transwise Transstrong. I am Caroline O'Reilly. Episode 5. There's a woman on the stage." Given that women's roles were then portrayed by men, consider those Shakespeare plays where a female character disguises themselves as a man, which of course was a male actor cross-dressed as a female character who disguises themselves as a man. Given that for Elizabethan audiences female roles being portrayed by men was the norm, how would, I wonder, a modern audience respond in comparison? Although there was no law that forbade women performing on the stage, in fact it's unclear as to why this seeming prohibition existed. It seems it was just the accepted practice. Although later, whilst Charles I was still intimately attached to his head, women did perform on the stage, except they were not English but French, as in Europe there was a totally different attitude to women performing on the stage. That attitude being, why not? However, during the English Civil War, both sexes no longer appeared on the stage, as theatres were closed, and this continued during the period referred to as the interregnum. Interregnum is defined as a period when a country or organisation does not have a leader, which I imagine would have come as somewhat of a surprise to the Lord Protector. I am pretty sure Oliver Cromwell was convinced that he was the leader of the country, given that Charles I had now been reduced to a spectral guest spot at the Oxford University's Christ Church College and the Bodleian Library. However, with the commencement of the reign of Charles II, also known as the Restoration, theatres were once more open, and the first British female actor took to the stage. Margaret Hughes is generally considered to be that first British female actor, or should that be actress? As to which word to use for a woman acting, actor or actress, there does not seem to be any clear answer, as some women will describe themselves as an actor, whilst others as an actress. Whichever term you prefer, the role that Margaret Hughes performed was that of Desdemona in Othello on the 8th of December 1660. However, whilst women could now portray female roles, that did not mean that men no longer portrayed female roles. In fact, men still took the plump female roles, a sexist attitude that continues today, with women generally played less than men in comparable acting roles. However, over time, this practice of cross-dressing faded, except for one particular role in pantomime, that of the Pantomime Dame. Pantomime's roots go back to the 16th century Italian entertainment of the Commedia dell'arte, which had a host of characters including Harlequin, and pantomime first made its appearance in early 18th century Britain, with Harlequin as the star character. A notable Harlequin was portrayed by John Rich, whose pantomimes were so popular that they were able to finance the building of the Theatre Royal Covent Garden in 1732. But it was at the beginning of the 19th century that the Pantomime Dame first made an appearance in Harlequin and the Mother Goose, or the Golden Egg. The play was written by Thomas John Dibdin and premiered on the 29th of December 1806 at the same Theatre Royal Covent Garden, and was a great success, running for 69 nights. Mother Goose was portrayed by Mr. Symonds, and until this production, Harlequin had been a favourite character, but the star of this production was Joseph Grimaldi, and his performance of the clown supplanted Harlequin as the audience's favourite. Grimaldi was a star of Regency pantomime, and his performances were a subtle combination of mime and gesture, and in 1812 they would go on to perform as a pantomime dame themselves, as Queen Rona Belliana in the pantomime Harlequin and the Red Dwarf. However, after Grimaldi's death in 1837, pantomime became less refined, and the pantomime dame lost a degree of subtlety in their performance. However, in the late 1880s, the pantomime dame transitioned from a minor to a main role, and it was Dan Leno, born on the 20th of December 1890, who brought about this transformation, and the Christmas pantomime we know today was born. Leno was a celebrated music hall performer who first created the character of an ordinary woman who resisted life's harassments with spirit and comedic patter that captivated the audience. Their performance so impressed the manager of the Surrey Theatre Lambeth, George Conquest, that they engaged them in the role of Dame Durden in Jack and the Beanstalk in the 1886-87 season, and was the star of the show. They then went on to appear in every one of Theatre Royal Drury Lane's spectacular pantos for the rest of their life. Leno died on All Hallows Eve of 1904. Before Leno, the character of Dame was generally not a believable character, more a caricature. But Leno transformed the role by creating a credible woman. Yes, the audience knew she was being portrayed by a man, but by the skill of Leno's performance enabled them to believe in the character. Before the Theatre Royal run of appearances, one of the dames Leno played was Widow Twankey in Aladdin, a character that was created in 1861 for a production at the Strand Theatre. The origin of the character's name is, I think, interesting. Twankey was the name of a cheap Chinese green tea, and Leno became one of the most famous portrayers of this character. Another famous dame character made an appearance towards the end of Leno's pantomime appearances, that of Mother Goose, who was created for them in the 1902-03 season. However, this is a different character to the earlier one of Mr. Symonds in 1806. That Mother Goose was a wicked old witch. The character of Mother Goose would transform from being humble, poor and plain to wealthy, haughty and beautiful, and finally evolve into the Mother Goose of today with top knot and bunion. Following Dan Leno was George Robey, 1869 to 1954, who became a star of pantomime. and the role of the pantomime dame was one that they enjoyed portraying, and Roby, as a comedian, was following a tradition of dames being played by comedians. Another notable dame was Douglas Byne, 1893 to 1987. Their dames were refined and upper class, a governess or a housekeeper, and they enjoyed playing queens, deploying innuendo, and their delivery and camp style often had the audiences in raptures of laughter. Although pantomime dames are usually played by male performers, there have been a few exceptions. Nellie Wallace, 1870 to 1948, being one of the few successful female pantomime dames, who replaced George Roby as Dame Trot in Jack and the Beanstalk at the London's Hippodrome in 1922. Arthur Askey, 1900 to 1982, is perhaps not a name one might associate with the character of the pantomime dame, and their characterisation differed in that they did not wear makeup apart from panstick, as they believed the audience should be aware that the dame was a man. Another well-known character was Old Mother Riley, who was not just a pantomime archetype, but a character created by Arthur Locan, 1885 to 1954, who often performed in this role with their wife Kitty McShane and had a life outside of pantomime. Innovation was brought to the role of the dame by George Lacey, 1904 to 1989, who made their debut as a dame in 1927, aged 19, and they would go on to appear in over 60 pantomimes. Whilst Lacey told working class gags, they did so with a posh accent, and they were also responsible for the tradition of costume changes for each scene, costumes that they both designed and made. The dame they are most associated with is Mother Goose. Stanley Baxter was a performer who had their own self-titled television shows that were most popular from the early 60s to the mid-70s, displaying their talent for creating a multitude of characters, both female and male. They also performed as a dame, and back in 1951 they actually appeared with Lacey, and much to Lacey's annoyance were embraced by the audience. If one is looking for a glamorous and extravagant dame, look no further than Danny LaRue, 1927 to 2009. Although they are most associated with female impersonation, Danny LaRue holds the record for the longest running West End panto at the Savoy Theatre, London. This record-breaking production was Queen Daniela and the Sleeping Beauty, and ran from the winter of 1968 to June 1969. A notable dame of regional theatre is Berwick Kayler, born on the 31st of October 1946, who is most famous for playing the dame in the Christmas pantos of the York Theatre Royal up until 2020, which they wrote and directed. Another notable dame was Les Dawson, who, outside of pantomime with Roy Barraclough, created the characters of two northern housewives, Sissy and Ada, with Dawson portraying Ada Shuttlebottom and Barraclough Sissy Braithwaite. They portrayed these characters on television during the 70s and 80s. It is not unusual for performers well known outside of pantomime to take the role of the dame, such as Christopher Biggins, Paul O'Grady, Julian Clary. Pantomimes are also popular in Australia, Canada, New Zealand and South Africa. In the United States, pantomime is not as popular as in Britain, but like in Britain, these productions are staged at Christmas. But I wonder for how long? Since the overturning of Roe versus Wade, and also in effect the banning of trans women from virtually all forms of sport, the next conservative target seems to be drag performance, with many conservative states attempting to class drag performance as adult entertainment. The legislation these conservative states would like to enact would be to ban drag performance being seen by anyone they class as a minor, which, depending on the state, could range from 15 years of age to, if alcohol is served, 21 years, with severe financial penalties if this prohibition is ignored. I hope no one invites any of these legislators advocating restrictions on drag performance to a pantomime. Can you imagine their reaction to Pantomime Dames and Principal Boys? What? A man dressed as a woman and a woman dressed as a boy? One could almost imagine them standing up and shouting, "This theatre is closed," which hopefully will be met with, "Oh no it isn't." This episode was written and presented by me, Caroline O'Reilly. Thank you for listening. Next time, hopefully within 3 weeks, the Kings and Queens of Drag.